to my channel. I'm here with another astrology oracle reading for you. We are looking at an event chart for August 15th at 11:11 a.m. in reference to this oracle reading. And this is giving us a Leo sun at 22 degrees, a 14-degree Libra rising, and the moon is currently in Aries at 10 degrees. In the next few days, we're actually going to see the moon form an exact conjunction with Chiron, which is at 16 degrees of Aries right now. Other than that, the only conjunctions that it looks like we are experiencing right now would also be between Uranus and the North Node in Taurus. And because the rising sign, the ASC, is set at 14 degrees for this chart, that means that the Descendant is also at 14 degrees. Pardon me. So, as I mentioned, we have the moon slowly approaching a conjunction with Chiron, but actually there's also going to be another player involved in that, which is going to be the Descendant. Now, I've not talked too much about the Descendant, I don't think, on any of my videos. I always talk about the rising sign in this chart. But because Libra and Aries are opposites, and the Ascendant and Descendant are exactly opposites, that is why we have this Descendant in Aries. And again, we do have Chiron at 16 degrees of Aries and the moon is at 10 degrees. So there's going to be like a triple conjunction going on between the moon, Chiron, and the Descendant in the next few days. Just a fair warning, that feels very emotional to me. Potentially a little bit explosive, very regenerative and healing, but it does feel very emotional. So something to keep on your radar. No major lunations this week. We had that full moon in Aquarius last week, and we will not have a new moon in Virgo, at least for another week, I believe. And we will get to that when we're closer to it, because I'm actually really excited for that new moon lunation. But yeah, it does not look like anything is too different from the last time that we read. We have seen Venus move into Leo, away from Cancer. Now, if you know anyone that has Venus in Leo, I was actually just talking to my best friend about this last night. There is some sexy, fiery, self-love energy behind that type of native. So I would absolutely say to just really ride that wave with Venus going into Leo and just do something that makes you feel sexy, do something that makes you feel alive, do something that makes you feel creative. And, you know, at the very least, do it for yourself if it's not for other people's awareness and recognition. So, just moving my cards around a little bit. And this one is catching my eye, so pulling my eye. Chiron! Of course Chiron has to make an appearance. I was actually hoping that it would. So Chiron is actually not a planet. Now, I did mention that Chiron is involved in a pretty tumultuous, emotionally explosive triple conjunction with the Descendant and the moon this week, but let's just talk about Chiron for a second. So in the mythology of Chiron, Chiron is the wounded healer. I'll give you a very brief overview. Chiron was born as a centaur, was not wanted by his parents, was kind of abandoned basically, and then was taken in by Apollo and was given the gifts of healing and medicine. And later on in Chiron's story, they basically go through a really long period of great physical suffering and turmoil, and eventually is released by the gods to become a constellation. And I'm sure that more of those specific details will be involved in the book when I read that, but let's talk about Chiron again, right? So Chiron is a wounded healer, and what this typically means is wherever your Chiron placement is indicative of perhaps a shortcoming or an early childhood wound, or potentially something that's carried over from a past life that is really, really needing some serious healing. And this type of healing is often transcended through the entire lifetime, right? So with the Chiron wound, this is sort of just like, it's us being our own worst enemy in a way, because when it comes to that Chiron wound, we are the only ones that can heal it, right? So often when I think of Chiron, I almost think about like going to therapy. And, you know, you can have a wonderful therapist, you can go to every single session, but if you yourself are not still doing the internal work, especially when you're outside of those sessions, then there is no real healing happening. So it is still up to you. And that's what Chiron, really wants us to remember, is that, no one is saving us. You know what I mean? We must save ourselves. And in the process, we will also save a lot of other people. Because again, Chiron is a wounded healer. So oftentimes these wounds that Chiron portrays, we draw people that have similar wounds to us, or we draw people in who we have the capacity to heal. And additionally, if it is a really true, beautiful companionship between these two souls involved, then oftentimes then you're also healing that person while they're giving you those those healing vibes. So it's going to depend a lot on where your Chiron is placed in what house, if it's in any type of alignment with any other planets, as well as what zodiac sign is in, to really get an understanding of the archetype of your personal Chiron. So in this chart here, we have Chiron at 16 degrees. Again, it is conjunct the Descendant. If I was to see something along these lines in someone's native birth chart, which in fact I actually recently did, it kind of tells me that this wound that is represented by Chiron being on the Descendant, being on sort of like the downfall, the past life, the beyond rooted experience, like true soul deep experiences that are coming with you, were not fruitful and fortifying, right? So seeing Chiron the Descendant, on one hand, it kind of makes me curious about the relationships that native may have, because the Descendant is right between the 6th house of daily routines as well as the 7th house of romantic and intimate partnerships. And again, romantic and intimate are not necessarily the same thing. So when it comes to the 7th house, yes, there is that romantic quality, but the intimate relationship could also be like a business partner or someone that is involved in like a very close to you project or task or anything of that nature. Someone that you have a very close relationship with, where it's very esoteric between the two of you, right? Like, excuse me, the experiences that you have, the connection that you have, the knowledge that you have of one another is like very much esoteric, it's very intimate. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a romantic undertone, right? And again, it's not siblings, that is the 3rd house, but this is, it can be, a friend of a friend, it can be, especially if you have a friend group that's very like close knit. It can also, again, be business partners. It could be like an assistant that you have, or you being someone else's assistant, any of those things. But because Chiron is so close to the Descendant, it is giving me the vibe that there is some serious healing that needs to take place with regards to what has, come forth into this life with them. So again, in this, we have Chiron and the Descendant in Aries. So what does that mean? I would interpret this as meaning that according to this chart, and if this was a native person, I often speak as if these charts are people, because that's just how my mind works. In a past life, there was a lot of emphasis on the self. There was a lot of emphasis on being a starter, being a go-getter, probably a lot of hustling, a lot of masculine energy because it is Aries. And then when you look at the rising sign in Libra, what you see is that in this lifetime, you see the world as a place for other, right? So you can see how it's kind of opposite, right? So that Descendant really marks a time that, whatever you have done in a past life or whatever else on the soul journey that you're in, those are things that I don't want to say you'll remember, right? Because if anything, it's a very unconscious memory. But the Descendant just shows us like these are our potential Achilles heel, because these are things that we have been through before. They feel familiar, almost even a sense of deja vu there. And then the rising sign is just like, this is your perspective in this lifetime. So if someone were to have a Libra rising and an Aries Descendant, again, that just feels a lot like, to me, that they have conquered or mastered many things for their own gain in a past life. And in this life, it is now time to, learn how to turn that emphasis towards others through being a Libra rising. And again, Chiron sitting there, Chiron being a wounded healer, it tells me that there's something about this person's journey that has really deeply agitated them. And not necessarily agitation in terms of like anger and frustration, but there is a serious sense of discomfort here. And Aries is not a very comfortable sign, right? So if you're someone who is a native Chiron and Aries, whoever inflicted this wound upon you, or whatever, you know, this wound came from, was very focused on the self, right? So I personally, I have Leo Chiron in the 9th house, and here I am being a little astrologer. But, you know, for me, I think that has manifested as more around the idea of faith. I don't have a lot of faith in myself the way that I have a lot of faith in like other people's potentialities or other people's skill sets. Or it's funny because I find and attract people who do have a lot of faith in me, who absolutely believe in what I'm doing, especially with tarot and astrology, because 9th house is very like spiritual in that way. So yeah, for me, it's been kind of interesting because, you know, sometimes and I've even done this when I was really big into PR and journalism and marketing, is I was like, do I know enough? Is there enough experience under my belt? Like, do I have the authority to even speak on these things? And it wasn't so much a power thing as much as it was like a knowledge thing, which again is the 9th house. So even though I've been very like self-critical and like not so sure if, you know, I was educated enough to start speaking out to people about certain things, the people that I would talk to were like, you are so knowledgeable in this. You have an instinct for this. And, you know, it's interesting because that is kind of what Chiron does. It's like we ourselves may feel that wound manifesting in all sorts of different ways, right? Insecurities or whatever else. But then the people that come into our life, they don't recognize that as a wound, right? They recognize that as a gift. And I think Chiron's interesting in that way because sometimes those wound placements actually do become our greatest gifts. So yeah, something to think about. Okay, Chiron, healing. Let us read from our little handy dandy notebook here. And I apologize for coughing, but I love the quotes in here so much, you guys. And I think the quote for Chiron is just lovely. The wound is the place where the light enters you. What? I love that. Like, has there ever been a more Chironic, you know, phrase? I don't think so. And like, again, like when I say that sometimes that wound can kind of like lead us to our greatest gift, this is a really beautiful illustration of that. You know what I mean? Like, only when things are broken do we really see the potential for really fortifying and healing it. Healing must take place before you're able to deal with your matter. Chiron is not a planet, but a comet with a unique orbit that travels through the entire zodiac over approximately 51 years. Chiron is Greek for the word man-horse. In myth, Chiron was a centaur, the wisest of all creatures, and was the wounded healer and self-enlightened shaman. He was wounded in the flank and almost crippled, but was rehabilitated from his wounds and sickness to pursue the healing arts through the guidance of Apollo, god of light. For astrologers, Chiron has a special purpose as a bridge between the inner and outer planets, a bridge between the animal and the human, the wisdom that lies in both life forms. In the chart, Chiron's place shows transition linking the mundane to the extraordinary. This heavenly body takes us on a journey through our own darkness, where we pass to the next side with strengths we did not realize we had until we passed through that dark place. And again, you know, when we think about Chiron as kind of like bringing forth this sort of like transmutation of healing energy, I love that the author has illustrated like the human and animal persona because, again, Chiron was a centaur. And there is an interesting mythological dynamic around centaurs that if you're interested, I would suggest listening to a podcast or two about it. Chiron has a relationship with Virgo as well as Sagittarius, lords over matters of health, illness, disease, as well as our journeys through life related to these. One must experience sickness before there's lasting health. Chiron also represents resurrection, so as some sort of Christ figure, I suppose you could say. And I mean, talk about wounded healer, right? Chiron is a blending of energies of Saturn and Uranus, meaning don't just throw out the old. There is wisdom there, but you should embrace both the old and the new. I think that's a really great piece of advice for the times we're living in. When the card turns up in a reading, health matters or medical issues could be of a concern, emotional healing especially. This could be a really great time to just go and visit the doctor, schedule some appointments. I recently made a dermatologist appointment to get a mole checked, so if you're a pasty white girl like me, something to think about. This is a time of teaching and learning. Schools could come up in this matter. Obviously, a lot of people are going back to school. They are ready to return to the school year. It's that energy, right? And it's so interesting that Chiron has an association with Virgo because, I mean, in just a few weeks, we will be in Virgo season, and this is kind of like the height of that transitional period, right? Especially for education. Certain sorrows of the deep path could be resurfacing. There is an awakening, and the symbol for Chiron is a key, which you can kind of see right here. It's a key. The card says that you have to open the right doors. To do this, you have to work with the wounded and downtrodden. If this is true, it's time to save yourself. So yeah, there's a couple like words that I'll give you too, just to kind of help you understand more about Chiron's archetype. Chiron is associated with the Hanged Man tarot card. It's all about contemplation, grief, redemption, the healing process. In brief, there could be something about deep listening, going on a journey through the darkness, dark night of the soul type of energy, homeopathic medicine, chiropractors, responsibilities, job changes in connection to self-healing. That is an interesting one. As well as just like home remedies, right? Again, like when we think about like Virgo, it's earth, right? So this could be also a really awesome time for you to learn a little bit more about growing your own herbs or drying your own herbs and using those in some form of homeopathic medicine, like teas or salves or tinctures. Very Chironic energy. So here's what you want to do with this. Take a look at where Chiron is in your chart and see what house it's placed in, what zodiac sign it's placed in, and see if it is communicating in any way through aspects to your other natal planets. And, really spend some time there, just kind of like enriching yourself in what your Chiron placement is bringing to the table, right? So again, in this example, we have Chiron forming a triple conjunction in the next few days to the moon and the Descendant. This is very emo. This is very dark night of the soul. If you're someone that has a placement like this, then I imagine you feel like you are constantly have to regenerate and rejuvenate yourself. So if that is the case for you and you are dealing with some serious Chironic energies this week, then just remember to, go outside, get into nature, get your feet in some dirt and come back down to earth a little bit, right? Because through our healing process, it is so great to be in spirit, to be in our minds, to be in our hearts, and to be in our healing. But we can't forget we are humans having a human experience, and coming back down to earth and being grounded within our physical bodies is just as important for the healing process as, dealing with our mental. So that's what I have for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you would be interested in getting a reading, my books are officially open for the fall. I'm excited because I will be doing a few events and having another in-person session in September and October at the Well in Kettering. So yeah, if you want to come get a reading or if you want to do one virtual, I would love to talk to you. So that's all for this week. I'll see you next week. Bye.